In the vastness of space, the Galactic Empire ruled with unquestioned authority. Their fleets, immense and unstoppable, spanned countless star systems, and yet, amidst their dominance, the Empire made a critical mistake. They overlooked Earth. Humanity, to them, was insignificant, a primitive species on a distant planet, easily dismissed. But Earth had changed. Over centuries, humans had grown stronger, smarter, and more resilient. They had faced extinction many times and survived every challenge thrown at them. Now, they were on the brink of unlocking something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. "Captain, they've found the Nexus," Liam said, his voice laced with urgency. The dimly lit war room aboard the human resistance ship buzzed with tension. His commanding officer, Captain Brian Mason, stared at the holographic display that showed the latest intelligence gathered on the Galactic Empire's movements. Brian nodded grimly. "We need to act fast. If the Empire gets its hands on the Nexus, there's no stopping them. It's our only chance to fight back." The Nexus wasn't just any artifact. It was ancient, hidden in the far reaches of the galaxy, and it held unimaginable power. If the Galactic Empire were to claim it, they would solidify their control, enslaving countless worlds. But if humanity could reach it first, they could tip the scales of war in their favor. Formulating the plan was not easy. Time was short, and the Empire's forces were closing in on the Nexus. Brian's team, Liam, Ava, Teshi, and a handful of battle-hardened soldiers, gathered to discuss their next move. Their plan: sabotage the Empire's outpost near the Nexus, preventing them from securing the artifact. "We'll plant explosives throughout their base," Brian explained, his voice steady but determined. "Ava, Teshi, you'll come with me to the power core and data center. Liam, you'll take the labs and communications hub. We need to cripple their systems and make sure they can't call for reinforcements." With the plan in place, the team split up and moved swiftly through the shadows of the Empire's outpost. Their stealth suits allowed them to bypass security measures undetected. Ava, Teshi, and Brian reached the data center, planting explosives at key points. The hum of the machinery around them was the only sound as they worked quickly, knowing every second counted. In the power core, Brian's mind raced. The fate of not only Earth, but the entire galaxy rested on this mission. If they failed, humanity might be wiped from existence, and the galaxy would fall under the Empire's iron grip forever. As the final charges were set, the team regrouped at the extraction point. They boarded their shuttle, and as the countdown on the explosives reached 0, the outpost erupted in a series of violent explosions. The blast echoed across the void of space, sending shockwaves through the stars. "We did it," Liam muttered, staring at the growing fireball in the distance. But Brian knew better. This was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. Back aboard their reconnaissance ship, the team gathered to assess the data they had recovered. The explosion had bought them some time, but the Galactic Empire would not be so easily deterred. "The Empire is building a fleet," Liam said, his voice tight with tension. The holographic display before them showed the scale of the threat. Warships, troop transports, and fighters, all armed with advanced weapons and shields, were being assembled. They weren't just searching for the Nexus anymore. They were preparing for war. Captain Brian Mason stood at the helm, studying the display. "If the Empire gets the Nexus, they'll be unstoppable. We have to find it first." The weight of their mission settled on the room. They had come so far, but this was only the beginning. Now they not only had to find the Nexus, but also find a way to neutralize the Empire's overwhelming fleet. Their next lead took them to a secret research facility hidden in the Zeta Quadrant. According to their intel, the Empire had been studying ancient artifacts related to the Nexus. If they could infiltrate the facility and gather more information, they might find the Nexus before the Empire did. But time was running out. As the ship hurtled through space, Brian's mind churned with possibilities. The mission had grown far more dangerous than he had imagined, but the stakes were too high to back down. The fate of humanity, and perhaps the entire galaxy, depended on them finding the Nexus first. The reconnaissance ship reached the Zeta Quadrant undetected, thanks to their advanced cloaking technology. They approached the Empire's facility under the cover of darkness, and once again, the team split up. Each member moved silently through the shadows, their nerves on edge, knowing that one misstep could spell disaster. Inside the facility, they discovered a treasure trove of ancient texts and artifacts, clues to the Nexus location. But they weren't alone. The Empire's forces were hot on their trail, and a confrontation was inevitable. The team worked quickly, downloading data, scanning artifacts, and piecing together the puzzle of the Nexus location. Every second felt like an eternity as they raced against time, knowing the Empire's fleet was closing in on them. Finally, they had what they came for. As they made their escape, alarms blared throughout the facility. The Empire had discovered them. "Move! We need to get out of here now," Brian barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. They sprinted back to the ship, their hearts pounding in their chests. The facility erupted in a hail of gunfire as Empire soldiers opened fire on them, but the team managed to board the ship just in time. As they sped away, Brian allowed himself a moment of relief. They had what they needed, but the real challenge lay ahead. The Nexus was close, and so was the Galactic Empire. The battle for the fate of the galaxy had begun. The Andromedans had never taken humans seriously. To them, Earth was just another backward planet with primitive technology, barely worth mentioning in their grand councils. But what the Galactic Empire failed to understand was that humanity thrived in adversity. In a galaxy full of powerful, ancient races, humans had always been underestimated, but they had an unmatched ability to adapt and innovate under pressure. After escaping the destruction of the Andromedan outpost, Captain Brian and his crew knew they had little time before the galactic forces regrouped. The Nexus, an ancient energy source capable of unimaginable power, was the key to controlling the galaxy, and both the humans and Andromedans were racing to find it. Humanity's survival depended on stopping the Andromedans from unlocking its full potential. As Brian stood on the bridge of the reconnaissance ship, a sense of urgency settled over him. They had struck a blow against the Andromedans, but it was a small victory in a much larger war. Now they needed to find the Nexus before the Galactic Council did. They couldn't rely on brute strength. They had to use strategy and outsmart their enemies. The holographic display on the bridge flickered to life, showing the layout of the Zeta Quadrant. Liam, Brian's second-in-command, pointed to a series of red dots on the map. "These are the hidden Andromedan research stations," Liam explained. "They've been collecting ancient artifacts and studying Nexus-related technology. If we can get in there, we might be able to uncover the location of the Nexus." Ava, the team's tech expert, nodded in agreement. "It won't be easy. Their security is top-notch, but if we can infiltrate one of these stations, I can hack into their database and download everything they've got." Brian clenched his fists. "We don't have a choice. The Andromedans are preparing for war. If they get their hands on the Nexus, humanity won't stand a chance." The plan was risky. They had to sneak into an Andromedan research facility, retrieve the data on the Nexus, and get out before being detected. One misstep, and they'd be captured or worse. But they had no other options. That night, under the cover of darkness, the human team launched their mission. They approached the Andromedan research station in a stolen Andromedan shuttle, hoping their disguise would hold up under scrutiny. Brian, Ava, and Liam were on edge, but their training kept them focused. As they landed on the station's docking platform, Brian gave his team a final nod. "We move fast, we move quietly. Stick to the plan, and we'll make it out of here." Ava's fingers danced over the controls of her datapad, disabling the station's internal alarms. They slipped through the corridors, undetected, until they reached the main data center. "Cover me," Ava whispered as she connected her datapad to the Andromedan system. Liam and Brian stood guard, their weapons ready. Every second felt like an eternity as Ava worked, her brow furrowed in concentration. The data began to download, but it was slow, too slow. Suddenly, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hallway. Andromedan guards. They had been discovered. "We're out of time," Brian hissed. "Ava, hurry." "I need 2 more minutes," Ava replied, her hands moving frantically over the controls. The guards were getting closer. Liam readied his weapon, his heart pounding in his chest. Then, just as the guards rounded the corner, Ava's datapad beeped. "Got it," she exclaimed. "Go, go, go," Brian shouted as they bolted down the hallway, blaster fire erupting around them. The team raced toward the docking platform, barely dodging the Andromedan soldiers. Explosions rocked the station as Brian threw a grenade behind them, covering their escape. They reached their shuttle just as the Andromedan alarms blared throughout the station. As they launched into space, Brian looked back at the station, now engulfed in chaos. They had succeeded. They had the data. But the war was just beginning. Back on the reconnaissance ship, the crew gathered in the war room. The data Ava had retrieved was laid out before them on a large holographic display, revealing the Andromedan's plans. It was worse than they had imagined. "They're preparing for a full-scale invasion," Liam said grimly, his eyes scanning the hologram. "The Andromedans have been building a massive fleet, equipped with some of the most advanced weapons we've ever seen. If they find the Nexus and harness its power, we won't be able to stop them." Brian's jaw tightened. "Then we can't let them find it." Ava zoomed in on one section of the hologram. "This is what we're looking for. According to the data, the Nexus is located on a planet deep in the Zeta Quadrant. The Andromedans haven't found it yet, but they're getting close." Brian nodded, formulating a plan. "We'll need to get there first, and when we do, we'll set a trap. If we can't have the Nexus, we'll make sure the Andromedans can't either." But Liam wasn't convinced. "It's not that simple, Brian. The Andromedan fleet is too powerful. Even if we find the Nexus, how are we supposed to stop them? We're outnumbered and outgunned." Brian stared at the holographic display, his mind racing. They were running out of time, and the odds were stacked against them. But they had no choice. Humanity's future depended on their success. "We've been underestimated before," Brian said firmly. "The Andromedans think we're weak, but they don't understand what we're capable of. We'll hit them where it hurts, sabotage their fleet, and take away their advantage. We may be outnumbered, but we have something they don't: our will to survive." The crew exchanged determined glances. They knew the odds were slim, but they had come too far to turn back now. The reconnaissance ship sped toward the Nexus's location, the crew preparing for what could be their final mission. Weapons were checked, strategies finalized, and silent prayers offered. Brian stood on the bridge, watching the stars blur past as they neared their destination. As they entered the Zeta Quadrant, the tension in the air was palpable. The Andromedans were close, and the humans were walking straight into their territory. But this time, they wouldn't be caught off guard. When they arrived at the Nexus planet, a barren, desolate world bathed in the eerie glow of a dying sun, Brian knew this was it. The final battle was upon them. "We're not just fighting for Earth," Brian said to his crew. "We're fighting for the future of the galaxy. Let's show them what humanity is made of." The humans prepared for battle, their resolve unshaken. The Andromedans were coming, and they would soon realize they had underestimated humanity for the last time. The barren world of Kamura, home to the ancient Nexus, was unlike anything Brian and his crew had ever seen. The planet's surface was covered in black rock, jagged and unforgiving, illuminated only by the dim light of a dying red sun. Massive storms raged across the horizon, sending arcs of purple lightning crashing into the ground. The air was thin, heavy with the weight of untold secrets and forgotten battles. As the reconnaissance ship descended through the atmosphere, the crew could feel the energy pulsing beneath the surface. The Nexus was near, and its power radiated across the planet, invisible but undeniably present. Ava, seated at the console, ran her scans with a furrowed brow. "There's a massive energy signature coming from the planet's core," she said, her voice tense. "It matches the readings we got from the Andromedan data. This has to be it. The Nexus." Brian stood behind her, eyes fixed on the dark landscape. He felt the weight of his responsibility, knowing that the fate of not only Earth but the entire galaxy was in their hands. The Andromedans were closing in, but they still had a window of time. A narrow one, but enough to act. "Take us down," he ordered. "We need to secure the site before they arrive." As the ship touched down, the crew disembarked, their boots sinking into the soft, volcanic soil. A strange stillness filled the air, broken only by the crackle of distant thunder. The Nexus's power felt overwhelming, an ancient force that had been dormant for millennia, but was now stirring as they drew closer. "Stay alert," Brian warned, his hand resting on the grip of his weapon. "We're not alone here." The team advanced cautiously toward the energy source, moving through a canyon of jagged rocks. The landscape was treacherous, but the pull of the Nexus guided them forward. It wasn't long before they reached the entrance to an ancient structure, half buried in the ground, its massive stone doors inscribed with symbols that none of them could decipher. "This is it," Liam said, stepping forward to examine the inscriptions. "The gateway to the Nexus." Ava knelt beside the doorway, pulling out her datapad to analyze the energy readings. Her eyes widened as she processed the information. "There's something wrong," she said, her voice shaky. "The Nexus, it's not just a source of power. It's alive. It's sentient." Brian's heart skipped a beat. A sentient energy source. The implications were staggering. The Nexus wasn't just a tool to be used. It was a force with its own will, its own desires. Before anyone could respond, the ground trembled beneath them. The air grew thick with tension as the towering stone doors slowly creaked open, revealing a glowing chamber within. The crew exchanged nervous glances, but there was no turning back now. "Stay close," Brian said, leading the way inside. The chamber was vast, its walls lined with strange, pulsating crystals that cast an eerie light across the room. At the center of the chamber floated a massive, swirling vortex of energy, the Nexus itself. Its brilliance was blinding, its power intoxicating. The team could feel its presence, not just in the room, but in their minds, probing their thoughts, testing their intentions. Suddenly, a voice, not spoken aloud, but in their heads, resonated through the chamber. It was ancient and deep, full of knowledge and weariness. **** You have come seeking power, but you are not the first. Many have sought to control me, to bend my will to their own. All have failed. ***. The crew froze, stunned by the voice. It wasn't just speaking to them. It was inside them, echoing in their very souls. Brian stepped forward cautiously, his voice steady but laced with awe. "We don't seek to control you. We only want to stop those who would use your power to destroy entire worlds." The Nexus seemed to consider his words, the energy swirling faster around the chamber. ***, you are different from the others. You do not seek domination, yet your kind is not without ambition. ***. Brian felt a strange connection growing, like the Nexus was weighing his truth against eons of experience. His thoughts were racing, but he remained focused. "We don't have much time. The Andromedans are coming. They want to use your power to rule the galaxy. If they get here, millions will die." The room was silent for a moment, the only sound the hum of the energy vortex. Then the voice returned, quieter, more contemplative. ***, Eve, I allow myself to be used. The galaxy will fall into endless war. But if I remain dormant, I cannot prevent the destruction that comes for you. There is another way. ***. The crew exchanged wary looks. Another way? Brian's mind raced with possibilities. "What way?" he asked, stepping closer to the vortex. ***, I cannot be controlled, but I can choose. My power can only be wielded by one who is worthy, one whose spirit aligns with my purpose. To protect, to restore balance. ***. Brian's breath caught in his throat. The Nexus was offering them a chance. One of them could become its chosen wielder. But what would that mean? Could a human truly control such immense power without losing themselves? Before he could speak, the ground trembled again, this time more violently. The Andromedans had arrived. Outside, the roar of Andromedan ships filled the sky as their landing craft descended toward the planet. Their soldiers poured onto the surface, weapons drawn, ready to secure the Nexus by any means necessary. "We're out of time," Liam warned, his eyes darting to the entrance. Brian turned back to the vortex, desperation in his voice. "What do you need from me? How do we stop them?" The Nexus pulsed brighter, its energy crackling through the air. ***, you must prove yourself. Step into the core and let your spirit be tested. If you are worthy, you will wield my power. If you are not, you will be destroyed. ***. The crew stared at Brian, a mixture of fear and hope in their eyes. This was their last chance, but it was a gamble that could cost him everything. Without hesitation, Brian took a deep breath and stepped forward. The vortex's energy enveloped him, lifting him off the ground and pulling him into its core. He felt his body dissolve into light, his mind expanding beyond anything he had ever known. He was connected to the Nexus, to its ancient wisdom, to the very fabric of the galaxy itself. Images flashed before his eyes, entire civilizations rising and falling. Wars fought over the Nexus's power, galaxies consumed by greed and destruction. But amidst the chaos, Brian saw something else, the potential for peace, for unity. The Nexus wasn't just a weapon, it was a force of balance, a guardian of harmony. Then came the final test. Would Brian wield this power for personal gain? Could he resist the temptation to become a god among men? His heart pounded as the Nexus's voice echoed in his mind, asking the question that would determine his fate. ***, what do you seek? ***. Brian's answer was clear, resolute. "I seek to protect, to preserve the future, for all of us." For a moment, there was silence. Then the vortex pulsed with a blinding light, and Brian felt the power surge through him. He had passed the test. Outside, the Andromedans breached the entrance, their soldiers rushing toward the chamber. But they were too late. Brian emerged from the vortex, his body glowing with the Nexus's power. With a single thought, he unleashed a wave of energy that sent the Andromedans flying back, their ships malfunctioning, their weapons disintegrating in their hands. The battle was over before it began. As the dust settled, the remaining Andromedans retreated, fleeing back to their ships in terror. They had come for ultimate power, but they had found something far more dangerous: humanity's determination to survive. Brian stood in the center of the chamber, his crew watching in awe. He could feel the Nexus's power coursing through him, but he knew it wasn't his to keep. He had been chosen to wield it for a purpose, and when that purpose was fulfilled, the power would return to its source. For now, the galaxy was safe, but Brian knew this was just the beginning. The balance had been restored, but there would always be those who sought to upset it. "We did it," Ava said, her voice barely a whisper. Brian nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the Andromedan ships disappeared into the stars. "For now," he replied, "but the war isn't over. We've bought ourselves time, and that's all we need." As they prepared to leave the Nexus planet behind, Brian felt a strange sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but they had proven something today, that humanity was more than a species of survivors. They were protectors, capable of standing against even the greatest forces in the galaxy. And with the Nexus at their side, they would be ready for whatever came next. The crew's return to the Starflame was solemn yet triumphant. Brian, still pulsing with the Nexus's power, could feel its subtle hum in his veins, like a distant thunderstorm waiting to be unleashed. Ava, Liam, and the others moved cautiously around him, unsure of how the encounter had changed him, if at all. The ship's engines roared to life, lifting them off Chimera's surface and back into the cold void of space. But even as they ascended, the weight of what lay ahead pressed on them. The Andromedans had been pushed back today, but their defeat would not end the war. In fact, Brian suspected it had only escalated things. "We should debrief with command," Liam suggested, breaking the tense silence. "They'll want to know what happened. They need to prepare for the next Andromedan strike." Brian shook his head. "No, not yet." Ava looked up from her console, confused. "Brian, the whole galaxy is counting on us. Command needs to know what happened with the Nexus. They need to understand the power we're dealing with." Brian stood at the viewing deck, staring into the vast expanse of stars. He could feel the nexus in his mind, an ancient intelligence silently observing everything. It was powerful, but it wasn't invulnerable. And more importantly, its true nature wasn't something he could fully comprehend. Not yet. "If we tell them now, it'll spread," Brian said, his voice low. "Every faction, every power in the galaxy will come for it. Not just the Andromedans. The Alliance, the Dominion, even neutral planets. Everyone will want to control the Nexus." Liam frowned. "So what do you propose?" "We keep it a secret." "We keep it quiet," Brian corrected. "At least until we understand what we're dealing with. The Nexus is more than just a weapon, more than some energy source. It has its own will, its own goals. If we don't learn how to work with it, how to earn its trust, we could end up doing more harm than good." Ava nodded slowly, understanding dawning on her. "You're right. If people see it as just another tool, they'll fight over it. And in the wrong hands. It could destroy everything," Brian finished. Liam's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. He knew Brian was right, even if it went against every protocol. If word of the Nexus spread, the galaxy would descend into chaos. The Andromedans were dangerous enough, but a galactic arms race for the Nexus's power could unravel everything they'd fought to protect. "All right," Liam said, stepping back. "We keep it between us for now. But how do we study something like the Nexus without attracting attention?" "I have a few ideas," Ava said, her mind already working. "We'll need to be discreet, but I think I can run some tests without raising too many red flags. At least as long as we're not being watched." Brian's gaze remained on the stars. "We'll need allies, trusted ones, people who won't sell us out or try to take the Nexus for themselves. And we'll need to move fast. The Andromedans won't give up." "They'll regroup," Liam agreed. "We've bought ourselves time, but that's it." A faint beeping interrupted the conversation. Ava glanced down at her console, her expression tightening. "We've got an incoming transmission," she said. "It's encrypted. Not one of our standard channels." Brian turned, his eyes narrowing. "Can you trace the origin?" Ava tapped a few keys, then shook her head. "No. Whoever sent it is masking their location, but it's directed specifically at us." Liam raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like someone knows what we've been up to." Brian walked over to Ava's station. "Put it through." The screen flickered, then stabilized, revealing the face of an old man. His features were sharp, weathered, with silver hair and piercing green eyes. He wore the insignia of a high-ranking officer in the Alliance, but Brian didn't recognize him. "Captain Brian Carter," the man said, his voice calm and measured. "I apologize for the secrecy, but I've been following your movements for some time now. I suspect you've recently made contact with something extraordinary." Brian stiffened, exchanging a quick glance with Ava and Liam. They hadn't even left the Nexus's orbit, and already someone knew. "Who are you?" Brian demanded, "and how do you know about us?" The man smiled faintly. "I am Admiral Cale Vos of the Alliance, though my official capacity is of little importance. What matters is that I know about the Nexus, and I know what the Andromedans are planning. Their assault on Kamara was only the beginning." Brian's pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" Admiral Vos' expression darkened. "The Andromedans are preparing a full-scale invasion of Earth. Their fleet is already mobilizing, and their goal is simple: conquer your homeworld and force you to surrender the Nexus. They believe Earth holds the key to unlocking its full potential." Liam cursed under his breath, but Brian remained focused. "How do you know this?" Vos leaned forward, his green eyes gleaming with intensity. "Because I've seen it before. The Nexus, or something like it. Ancient powers buried deep in the galaxy's history, hidden for millennia. Every civilization that's tried to control it has been wiped out. The Andromedans are making the same mistake." Brian's mind raced. If Vos was telling the truth, Earth was about to become the center of a war that would determine the fate of the galaxy. And the Nexus, the power now flowing through him, was at the heart of it. "How do we stop them?" Brian asked, his voice steady. Vos's gaze didn't waver. "You can't, not alone. The Andromedans have allies, hidden factions working within both the Alliance and the Dominion. They've been preparing for this war for decades, waiting for the right moment to strike. You need to gather your own allies, those who can be trusted, those who understand what's at stake. Why are you helping us? Alva asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. Vo smiled again, but it was a cold, calculated smile. Because I believe in balance, Captain. The Andromedans seek to tip the scales in their favor, to dominate the galaxy with unchecked power. If that happens, everything we've built, everything you fought for, will crumble. Brian studied Voss's face, searching for any sign of deception, but the Admiral's expression remained calm, unwavering. You don't trust me, Voss said, reading Brian's thoughts. Good, you shouldn't. Trust is a luxury we can't afford right now. But understand this, if we don't work together, the Andromedans will take Earth, and they will come for the Nexus. And when they do, there will be no stopping them. The screen went dark, cutting off any further discussion. The bridge was silent, the weight of Voss's words hanging heavy in the air. What do we do? Liam asked, his voice tight. Brian stared at the empty screen, his mind racing. The Andromedans were coming for Earth, and now they had more than just raw power at their disposal. They had allies in high places, and their plans were far more advanced than he had imagined. We prepare, Brian said at last, his voice firm. We find allies of our own, trusted ones, and we make sure the Andromedans never reach Earth. Ava nodded, but her eyes were filled with worry. And if they do? Brian glanced at the stars, feeling the weight of the Nexus inside him, a power that could either save the galaxy or destroy it. Then we use the Nexus, he said quietly, but only as a last resort. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, understanding the gravity of what that meant. The Nexus wasn't just a weapon, it was a force of balance, of cosmic equilibrium. Wielding it could tip the scales in either direction, and the consequences could be devastating. But for now, there was no other choice. The Andromedans were coming, and the unseen war had already begun. As the Starflame jumped into hyperspace, Brian felt the Nexus stir within him once more. He knew what was coming, what they were up against, and he would be ready. The Starflame slipped through hyperspace, hurtling toward Earth, and Brian could feel the tension in every corner of the ship. The revelation from Admiral Cale Voles lingered heavily in their minds. An Andromedan invasion was imminent, and Earth was the target. As the crew worked tirelessly to prepare, Brian retreated into his quarters, seeking a moment of solitude. He closed his eyes, feeling the steady hum of the Nexus's power within him. Its presence was both a gift and a burden. He had gained unimaginable strength, but the cost of using it recklessly could be catastrophic. The Nexus wasn't a simple weapon, and its vast, ancient intelligence required more from him than just brute force. Suddenly, his mind was pulled into a vision, distant and nebulous, like a memory not his own. He saw the Earth, not as it was now, but bathed in a strange, shimmering light. Massive ships, their design unmistakably Andromedan, loomed over cities, and the sky was filled with fire. People ran, their faces twisted in terror as the invaders marched forward. The Earth's defenses, though formidable, were crumbling. It was a glimpse of the future if they failed. The vision shifted, and Brian saw something else. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, hidden in forgotten caverns, was a structure. It pulsed with the same energy as the Nexus, an ancient relic buried long ago. Could this be the key to what the Andromedans sought? Was there more to Earth's history than they had ever known? He opened his eyes, shaken but resolute. Whatever the Andromedans wanted, it was connected to the Nexus, and Earth held a secret they hadn't yet uncovered. A knock at the door broke his concentration. Ava entered, her face as serious as ever. "We're nearing Earth," she said quietly, "but there's something else you need to see." Brian followed her to the bridge, where Liam stood by the comm station, his expression grim. "We've been monitoring communications from the Alliance," Liam said. "There's chatter about an unknown fleet approaching Earth. No one's identified them yet, but they fit the profile of Andromedan ships." Brian's heart sank. They had expected this, but it still felt too soon. How long until they reach Earth? 2 days at most, Ava replied, her voice tight. If we're lucky, the planetary defenses can hold them off for a little while. But they're not equipped to deal with a full-scale invasion, Brian finished. Not without the Nexus. Ava nodded. And if Vos is right, the Andromedans aren't just attacking. They're after something specific. Brian glanced out at the view screen, where the faint glow of hyperspace rippled around them. He couldn't shake the feeling that Earth was hiding something connected to the Nexus. The vision he had seen confirmed it. The Andromedans weren't just after control. They were searching for knowledge, for power buried deep within the planet itself. What about allies? Brian asked. Has anyone responded to our calls for reinforcements? Liam shook his head. The alliance is spread thin. Most of their fleets are tied up with border conflicts, and the Dominion is still rebuilding after the last war. The neutral systems are staying out of it for now. Brian clenched his fists. They were alone. The Andromedans were coming, and Earth was on the brink of destruction. But there was still one hope, the Nexus. If they could unlock its full potential, they might stand a chance. Prepare the crew, Brian ordered. We're going to Earth's surface. There's something down there we need to find. Ava frowned. You think the Nexus is connected to something on Earth? I know it is, Brian said, his voice firm. I saw it. Liam's eyebrows shot up. You saw it? What are you talking about? Brian hesitated. He hadn't told anyone about the visions yet, unsure of how to explain them. But there was no time for secrets. The Nexus is showing me things, visions. I saw Earth, under attack. But I also saw something hidden beneath the surface, a structure that pulses with the same energy as the Nexus. If we can find it, we might be able to turn the tide. Ava and Liam exchanged uncertain glances. Are you sure? Ava asked. What if it's a trap, or worse? What if it's what the Andromedans are after? It is, Brian admitted, but we have no choice. If we don't act, Earth will fall, and they'll take the Nexus anyway. Liam nodded reluctantly. Then we're with you. But we need to be careful. If the Andromedans have spies in the Alliance, they could already know what we're planning. We'll move quickly, Brian said, his resolve hardening. And quietly. No one else can know. As the Starflame dropped out of hyperspace and Earth came into view, the crew prepared for what might be their final stand. The planet below looked peaceful from space, its blue oceans and green continents a stark contrast to the chaos they knew was coming. But Brian could feel the storm brewing, both outside and within him. The ship descended toward the surface, slipping past civilian traffic and military patrols. They landed in a remote part of North America, far from the eyes of prying satellites and scanners. Brian, Ava, Liam, and a small team disembarked, heading toward the coordinates from his vision. The landscape was desolate, mountains rising in the distance, rocky plains stretching out before them. The air was thick with tension, the calm before the inevitable war. Are you sure this is the place? Liam asked, scanning the horizon. Brian nodded, his eyes fixed on the ground. He could feel the Nexus's energy growing stronger with each step. They were close. They trekked across the rugged terrain, following a path only Brian could sense. As they approached a cliffside, the ground beneath them shifted, revealing a hidden entrance, a cavern that seemed to swallow the light around it. This is it, Brian whispered. The group entered cautiously, their weapons drawn. The cavern was massive, its walls lined with ancient markings, glowing faintly with the same energy as the Nexus. Brian could feel it pulsing in time with his own heartbeat. At the center of the cavern was the structure from his vision, a monolithic tower of black stone, humming with power. It looked like nothing they had ever seen, alien and yet familiar. What is this place? Ava asked, awe in her voice. It's part of the Nexus, Brian said, stepping forward, or something connected to it. I think this is what the Andromedans are after. Liam moved closer to the structure, examining its surface. But why? What does it do? Brian didn't have an answer. All he knew was that this place held a key to unlocking the Nexus's true potential. But before he could respond, the cavern trembled. Dust and rocks fell from the ceiling, and a deep, rumbling sound echoed through the walls. "They're here," Ava said, her voice tight with fear. Brian looked up, feeling the presence of something vast and terrible above them. The Andromedans had arrived. Their fleet was in orbit, and it wouldn't be long before they reached the surface. "We need to move," Brian said, his voice urgent. "Whatever this structure is, we need to activate it. It's our only chance." As the ground shook beneath them, the crew prepared for the battle ahead. The Andromedans were coming, and the fate of Earth and the galaxy rested on the secrets hidden in the shadows of this ancient place. Brian reached out, placing his hand on the black stone. The nexus inside him responded, its energy surging through him and into the structure. For a brief moment, everything was still. Then, with a flash of light, the monolith came to life. The battlefield was eerily quiet. The Andromedan ships that had once darkened the skies over Earth were now scattered wrecks, burning fragments falling into the atmosphere. On the surface, the monolithic structure that had been buried for millennia stood silent again, its ancient power expended. Brian stood at the edge of the cliff, overlooking the horizon where the final battle had taken place. The nexus inside him was quiet, its overwhelming presence diminished, but not gone. He could still feel its pulse, faint but steady, like the heartbeat of something vast and eternal. The power that had surged through him at the moment of activation had been unlike anything he had ever known. It had allowed him to stand against the Andromedans and push them back, but it had come at a cost. He looked down at his hands. They still trembled slightly, the aftermath of channeling such a raw, ancient force. The Nexus had saved Earth, but it had also left him changed. He was no longer the same person who had set out on this journey, and he wasn't sure if he ever could be again. Behind him, Ava and Liam approached, their expressions tired but relieved. The war was over, at least for now. "We did it," Ava said softly, standing beside him. "Earth is safe." "For now," Brian replied, his voice quieter than he intended. "But the Andromedans aren't gone. They'll be back. They always come back." Liam folded his arms, gazing out at the sky. "But next time, we'll be ready. The Alliance knows what they're up against now. And we have the Nexus." Brian wasn't so sure. The Nexus had won them this battle, but it was not a weapon that could be used lightly. It was ancient, unpredictable, and alive in ways they barely understood. He had felt his hunger for more, for knowledge, for power, for connection. He wasn't even certain that it could be controlled. As if sensing his hesitation, Ava placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out," she said gently. "Together." He nodded, grateful for her presence. She had been with him from the beginning, through every challenge and every impossible decision. If anyone could help him navigate the uncertain path ahead, it was her. Liam cleared his throat, glancing at them both. "What now?" he asked, a slight smile on his lips. "We just saved Earth. Seems like we should celebrate or something." Brian chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I think I've had enough excitement for a while." Ava smirked. "I'm with you on that." They stood there in silence for a few moments, watching as the first rays of dawn began to break over the horizon. The sun's light stretched across the land, a symbol of hope after the darkness they had faced. But even as they watched, Brian knew this wasn't the end. Far out in the depths of space, the Andromedans would regroup. They would learn from their defeat and come back stronger. And Earth's secret, the connection to the Nexus, was no longer hidden. Others would come looking for it. Some would seek its power, others its destruction. The galaxy was changing, and with the Nexus, so was he. As they turned to leave the cliffside, Brian paused. He could feel something, someone, watching him. He glanced over his shoulder, but there was nothing. No figure in the distance, no ship overhead. Just the quiet wind and the empty sky. But deep down, he knew the Nexus wasn't finished with him. The ancient intelligence that had guided him, that had shown him visions of the past and future, was still with him. And its purpose, whatever it was, had only just begun. Walking back toward the Starflame with Ava and Liam at his side, Brian took a deep breath. The fight for Earth was over, but the real journey, the one that would take them to the farthest reaches of the galaxy and beyond, was just beginning. And as long as the Nexus pulsed within him, he knew that journey would be unlike anything they had ever imagined. In the darkened void of space, far from Earth, a lone Andromedan warship drifted silently. Its hull was damaged, its engines cold, but deep within its core, something stirred. A signal pulsed, faint but constant, a call that resonated across the stars. And on a distant world, hidden from the eyes of the galaxy, an answer came. The Nexus was not alone, and neither was Brian.